Today is Friday, September 11th, the year 2020. This is the Brian on Baseball podcast. I'm Brian Goudsward. On a day that we remember the many lives that were lost during the 9/11 attacks, now 19 years ago. It's a day that everyone, regardless of who you are, remembers exactly what you were doing when you found out the news. And that's whether you were someone at work, a young person in school, someone who was at home with your kids. Everyone has their own story of that day. And for me, I was in second grade, New Monmouth Elementary School, and the thing that I remember most being in the classroom that day is one by one each student getting called for early dismissal, and at the time, nobody knowing what was going on because it was well before the days of social media, instant news everywhere, and so everyone was just left wondering exactly what was going on. I remember being one of the last few in class, then eventually I did get pulled out. My mom tried to explain as best she could what had transpired, and of course, at that point, being so young, I just don't know that I could fully comprehend or wrap my head around what she was saying, but it's one of the darkest days in our nation's history, and on this day we remember the victims, and our thoughts are with the families who were impacted. And it hits closer to home here in the Northeast because New York City is our backyard. We were so close. It hit everybody hard, whether you lived in California or anywhere around the world for that matter. But being so close to the city, there's more emotions knowing that it happened so close to home. So our thoughts are with the families who still are feeling the impact of losses to this day, and we're thinking of you. And now we'll move into our baseball program. We have a lot to get to today. Coming up later, we'll take a look at the series to watch this weekend, as we do each and every week. Plus, we'll give you the rest of the matchups. Remember, last week we had 20 games on the schedule. Now, today it's still a pretty hefty schedule with 16. Still have a couple of doubleheaders, so we'll dissect and go through some of the key matchups later. Plus, this day in baseball history and more. But we're going to begin locally, as we typically do, because there's no shortage of headlines when it comes to the Yankees and the Mets these days, and what a strange 2020 it has been for everyone in the world, and baseball as well, where we've seen the Yankees have major struggles. Finally got off the schneid in their last game on Wednesday in Toronto, so they just were able to salvage one, I should say, in Buffalo against the Toronto Blue Jays. And then they were scheduled to play last night with Garrett Cole on the mound against Baltimore. That game postponed due to rain, so the Yankees, one of the few doubleheaders, which will be happening this afternoon. The first game set to begin as of this recording in less than a half an hour from now, when Garrett Cole will be on the mound. And the Yankees are going to try to take any momentum from that last win when they won 7-2. They got a couple key home runs. Gleyber Torres finally got in on the act. They got a well-pitched game from the young Davy Garcia, who has been a bright spot in that rotation, one of their top prospects and looking like the real deal in the early part of his career. Elsewise, though, it has been a struggle in a lot of areas. The bullpen has let games get away. Offensively, they have not produced. The big theme is last year, despite so many injuries that they had, guys stepped up in places where we saw career seasons, and you fast forward to this year and it just isn't happening. I'm not quite sure that it was sustainable what they did last year, but there has been a huge drop-off. You add in a couple of the quote-unquote stars who aren't producing. I'm looking at you, Gary Sanchez, who was benched earlier in the week, and since he's come back hasn't exactly produced. And we know still some of the key factors, some of the big stars remain out of the lineup. Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton. So it just has not been a full group for the Yankees this year, and they've had a lot of trouble. They had a game in that Blue Jays series where they had a lead, a pretty considerable lead, and the bullpen just melted down. We saw the Blue Jays put up a 10 spot, capped off by a grand slam, and Toronto went on to win that game. So as difficult as it's been, the Yankees still very much in postseason position. They're holding on to the 8th spot. But the thing is, when you look at the landscape of the league, and later on I'm going to kind of dissect the postseason picture, But the bottom line is the Yankees aren't in real danger of missing the playoffs, and that's because the teams that are behind them are the Baltimore Orioles, the Detroit Tigers, the Seattle Mariners. Nobody in their right mind thinks any of those teams are going to find a way into the postseason. It's been a nice story for a couple teams that had been full-on in rebuild mode. The Orioles have been a nice story. They've been very pesky this year. But does anybody really think they're going to overtake the New York Yankees and get in the postseason? I just can't see it happening. Now, the Yankees are going to have to take care of business as the Orioles come in this weekend. And you got to take this doubleheader, and a lot of times doubleheaders end up in splits. If you're the Yankees right now, you got to look at these two games, and you got to sweep both of them. You got to put some separation between the Orioles and your team in the standings. That's all there is to it. You know, one team is the Yankees, the other is the Orioles. Let's be real. The talent gap, even with the amount of injuries they're dealing with, is still substantial. And there's no excuses, and Garrett Cole has struggled at times this year. He's got to take the ball today and go out and give you 7 dominant innings, strike out 10, and lead the Yankees to a win. Anything short is a big disappointment. You're paying him $324 million. He's got to look like it, and it's got to start this afternoon. Now, that's not to say the Orioles are a pushover, because they're not, and just ask the Mets, who played them this week at Citi Field and were lucky to get one of the 2 games there, because the Orioles looked like they had the second one wrapped up, and they've had some nice offensive performances. They've called up the young prospect Ryan Mountcastle. He's hit at an elite level to start his career. For some reason, you can't get Jose Iglesias out this year, so there's been kind of some surprising performances. They've been pesky. They've been a nice story. Nobody saw this coming after the last 2 years have been nothing short of dreadful for the Orioles. But when you get a season like this in 60 games, you knew going in you were going to see some surprise performances, and the Orioles had been exactly that. So give them credit, and it'll be interesting to watch as they hit Yankee Stadium this weekend. As for the Mets, and I mentioned they were fortunate to get that last game against the Orioles. It was a wild game, a come-from-behind affair that they took 7-6, a game that featured some tremendous defense. I mean, I can't remember a game where the Mets made so many defensive gems, none bigger than the catch Michael Conforto made. Orioles had the bases loaded. Rio Ruiz hit a shot, and I mean a shot, to the wall in right field that Conforto ran down, made an over-the-shoulder catch on the warning track, saved 3 runs, and as Howie Rose said on the radio call, just may have saved their season at that point. So it was an unbelievable play. Jeff McNeil flashed the leather in left field, and then the Mets were able to rally, eventually get the go-ahead home run off the bat of Pete Alonso, and go on to a win. So another feel-good win for the Mets, but they have had no way of going on a sustained good stretch, and the reason is because their pitching has been utterly atrocious. I mean, this is a team that is scoring plenty of runs, getting on base. They're in the top 10 in the league in all the major offensive categories, but they are getting nothing out of this starting rotation. I mean, when DeGrom doesn't pitch, Seth Lugo, they moved into the rotation. He's not a guy who's going to give you a lot of innings. He'll give you 4 quality innings, but he's not going to go deep into the game. The guys they brought in as free agents, Porcello and Waka, both have been terrible. ERAs over 6 for both of them. David Peterson got off to a nice start. He's kind of fallen back. So they're just getting nothing out of this rotation. They're not getting any length. They're not getting any productivity. And it's just making it very difficult to go on any kind of a sustained winning run. And I just think that's going to be the thing. Look, this team looks talented enough, especially with its position player group, to be a playoff team this year. But they are being held back enormously by this pitching staff, and it's just really frustrating to watch because you look at them and you say they could really do damage this year. They've been fun to watch at times, but they're just not getting anything out of that staff, and it's a big problem. So now they hit Buffalo as the Yankees and Mets exchange opponents here from who they played earlier in the week. Blue Jays, another team, they played good baseball. 5 games over 500. We talked during the offseason about all this second-generation big leaguers they have on that roster. Now, they played a good part of the year without the likes of Bo Bichette, who had gotten off to a great start. But it was a team that, in that offseason, made moves to get better and Starting pitching was an area of weakness. They brought in Hyun-Jin Ryu. At the trade deadline, they brought in Robbie Ray and Ross Stripling. So their pitching isn't going to be the strength of this team, but it's been good enough. And their bullpen, while overworked, has gotten the job done. So the Blue Jays are in good position. They look clearly like they're going to be one of the 8 teams to make the playoffs in the American League. And the Mets are going to see them this weekend, getting their first look at Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Kevin Biggio and all the rest of the guys. Toronto without Teoscar Hernandez, who is having a very good offensive season. One guy having kind of a breakthrough year for the Blue Jays is Randall Grichuk in center field. So should be a pretty good competition for the Mets this weekend. They have Jacob deGrom on the hill, and they'll try to get a win tonight and see if they can take a series after a nice feel-good win over Baltimore on Wednesday night. And now moving on, because I feel like on the show there's been a focus on the same bunch of teams. You've heard me talk a lot about the San Diego Padres and the Oakland A's, and of course locally, and spend a lot of time on both the American League and National League East. But I want to get to a team that has almost been completely forgotten about, and it's kind of stunning when you think about the headlines that this team was drawing in, say, January and February leading up to the start of the season, and I think that probably gave it away if you're listening, which would be the Houston Astros. And this has been kind of a fascinating team, as we know, with the whole sign-stealing situation, and we knew going in that they were going to be the beneficiary of starting the season so late. Not that people were going to forget about what they did, but the gap of not playing, I think, was a huge boost for the Astros, and then factor in not having fans when they go into opposing ballparks, booing them and ripping them to shreds. So that has all helped. But I feel like as we've gone about this 2020 season, who has talked about the Houston Astros? I mean, we have heard nary a word about them, and that's because they've been, well, mediocre, which, you know, if you've listened to the show when I was going through the offseason, I was down on this team, and I had thought that the whole sign-stealing thing was going to take its toll, the emotional impact that it had, everybody talking about them in a negative light, and they have not been all that special this year. They've had a lot of issues offensively. We know about that core group of players that has been so instrumental in making this team a big winner in years past. They're just not having those kind of seasons, and I'm talking about Jose Altuve, who's now injured. But George Springer is not having a Springer-esque year. Neither is Alex Bregman, who also has been on the shelf for part of the year. So it has just not clicked at any part for this Astro team. And it started pretty early. Once you got the word that Justin Verlander had a pretty significant injury to deal with that at first we thought might be season-ending. Who knows? He might come back at some point. But that takes an enormous piece out of that rotation. You know already that they had lost Garrett Cole in free agency. So that left the rotation with a lot of question marks, and that's what you have right now. Outside of Zach Greinke, who's pitching very well, it's a lot of young and unproven guys in that rotation. Same for the bullpen, where it's a lot of anonymous rookies. Some are getting the job done, some aren't. But it has just not come together for the Astros, who sit one game under the 500 mark. Interestingly enough, they have been great at home. They've been awful on the road. 11 games under 500 compared to 10 over at Minute Maid Park. But I just wanted to bring them up because I feel like, you know, even watching MLB Network, who does a great job of covering all the teams, you just have not heard that much about this team, and I just found it surprising considering all that we were talking about during the offseason and leading up to the start of the season was this team. They had the bullseye on their back. There was the take that they were going to be fine, still win over 100 games. Had we played a normal season, people still thought this was an upper echelon team in the American League, and they very much are still in postseason play despite being a game under 500. But I don't look at them as a big threat for the reasons I talked about. It just doesn't look like the same group. Now, one reason that I do think things have been kind of quiet with this team is the presence of Dusty Baker, who at the time they made the hire, I thought it was a sound move. I thought it made a lot of sense. A guy who's been all over the place, who's managed for a million years, all different spots, to kind of calm the storm within this team. And I think it's a credit to him why there hasn't been as much talk surrounding this team and why we really haven't mentioned anything about the sign stealing. But I think, too, you have to factor in if you believe they're not cheating now and the offensive numbers have taken a hit. So there was no question that they were benefiting from what they were doing. That's why they were doing it. But we'll see if they're able to make any noise come the postseason. It'll be very interesting to see, especially if they get Justin Verlander back and if they get fully healthy. They still are dangerous because of who they are and what they've done the last couple of years. When I've seen them this year, I don't think they've been all that special. And the reason I'm bringing them up is because I just don't think anybody's really been talking about them this season. So I found that interesting, and they will start a series against the Dodgers this week and actually off tonight, and then the World Series matchup from 2017 will be played this weekend. And now I want to run down here the postseason picture. We know that it's a different year. 16 teams are making the playoffs. This is something that I think is good for this season, like some of the other new rules that have been implemented for this truncated season with the 3-batter minimum rule and the runner on second base to start extra innings, and of course the designated hitter, which I think is the most likely to stay for next year. I personally do not want to see 16 teams make the playoffs during a 162-game season because I think it really devalues the regular season, and I think that's something that makes baseball really good, is that its regular season is compelling. And if you're going to have this many teams make it and you're going to have teams that are 77 and 85 make the playoffs, it's just not going to be that interesting. Sure, the playoffs will be fun to watch, but I just don't want to see that go into effect for the years to come. But as we look at things for this year, you look at the American League, and I think the 8 teams are pretty well set. I talked about the Yankees holding on to the last spot at 8 right now, and the teams that are behind them, I don't think anybody really thinks the Tigers or Orioles or Mariners are going to find their way into the playoffs. So if you don't believe that, the 8 are pretty much set, and they are as follows, with the top 2 in each division getting automatic bids and then 2 wild cards in each league. So in the East, you have Tampa Bay and Toronto. In the Central, a Central that has been very good this year, you have the White Sox and the Twins. And in the West, the aforementioned Astros trail the division-leading Oakland A's, with Cleveland taking the other wild card spot with the Yankees. And I think those are going to be the 8. And the Yankees right now, as the 8th seed, would take on number 1 Oakland. So we'll see how that'll go. The National League is a little different in that you have more teams in the mix. You have the 8 right now, Atlanta and Philadelphia in the East, the Cubs and Cardinals in the Central, Dodgers and the Padres in the West, and currently the 2 wildcard spots belong to Miami and San Francisco. Nobody exactly saw that coming. But in the National League, there's other teams that are closer to playoff positioning. One of them is the Mets. You still have Colorado not all that far behind, the Brewers as well, and the Reds holding on to hope if you believe in their pitching staff. If I had to say at this point, though, I think the 8 that are currently holding the spots in the National League are going to be the 8. I don't see any of the others sneaking in. Colorado has been too inconsistent. As much as I'd want to say and believe that the Mets are going to find a way in, I just think they are too short on pitching right now. The Brewers just have not hit at all this year. When you looked at them, you did not think Christian Yelich was going to have as slow of a season as he has, and he's not gotten a lot of help in that lineup to pick him up. And Cincinnati, I just don't like what I've seen from them. Yes, they have good starting pitching, but their offense has not gotten the job done. I just don't think it's going to happen for the Reds this year. So I think the teams that are in play in both leagues are going to be the 16. I would go as far as to say I would be surprised if any of the others overtake teams that are currently positioned. I think San Francisco has done too much offensively. Miami has been a nice story. The one thing with them is they have a lot of games to play. They're playing a 5-game series this weekend against the Phillies, so their schedule's going to be a little bit difficult, and they're playing some stiff competition. But I just don't see any of those other teams overtaking them. So that's what we've got as of now, and I thought it was a good time to take a look at the postseason picture because, believe it or not, we are close now to the end of the season. We're down to the last 16 or 17 games in the regular season before the playoffs will begin, and the playoffs are going to be wild. It's going to be fun hosting a show, having wall-to-wall games, playoff games to break down, and that's an early look at what we have at this point in time. We'll see if anything changes, but I'd be pretty confident the 16 teams now are the 16 we will see come October. And with that, we move into the series to watch this weekend. This is where we take one from the weekend slate to highlight. And this week was a fairly easy choice for me, scrolling through the games. The one that caught my eye, the Indians going into Minnesota to take on the Twins. Very intriguing on a lot of levels. These teams separated by just a half a game in the standings. And it's the contrasting styles that stand out. It's Cleveland with its excellent starting pitching all season long and inability to produce offensively. And by the way, now they've lost the last 3 games, while Minnesota goes about it differently. The Bomba Squad, as they're known offensively, it's a team that hits the ball out of the ballpark, and that's the identity of this team. They have not been 100% this year, haven't been exactly what they were last year, mainly because they've never had the full group on the field together. And Josh Donaldson was out for a while, as was Byron Buxton, Max Kepler currently on the shelf. So they haven't clicked the way they did when they hit a record-setting 300-plus home runs a season ago. But they're still a formidable offensive team. And I'll tell you, Nelson Cruz is probably the best he's ever been, which that's saying something because he's 40 years old. He's had a heck of a career. He's always been a big power hitter, but I don't think he's ever been as good of an all-around hitter as he is right now. And he is, in a way, carrying that lineup. They have gotten Donaldson back from the injured list. Starting pitching has been so-so. They brought in a few veterans during the offseason. Kenta Maeda's done very well. Big thing for the Twins is getting Jose Barrios to be that ace that a lot of people think he can be. Has that kind of stuff. If he can be that guy, that's a team to watch out for in the playoffs because we know they can hit. If they get that stop or the guy to match up against another team's number one, that's when the Twins can make some noise. And also it'd be nice if they could avoid the Yankees in the playoffs because we know how that always goes. But this weekend I'm looking out for that divisional matchup, and another reason why tonight Shane Bieber is on the mound, and boy, has he been unbelievably good. The ERA is a minuscule 1.2, something like that. He has just been exceptional to watch. A guy who's just taken it to a new level. We knew he was always a good pitcher, but this is that jump to elite status for Shane Bieber that has some people talking potential MVP, let alone Cy Young Award for this season. So look out. Cleveland, Minnesota series starts tonight, and that should be a fun one. And now I'll run down the rest of the matchups for this Friday. Start locally with the aforementioned Mets, who start the series in Buffalo against the Blue Jays this evening, with DeGrom on the mound against the veteran Chase Anderson. The amazing thing about Jacob DeGrom, you didn't think he could actually get better, but he's actually gotten better. He's throwing harder than ever before. Average fastball velocity is around 98 miles an hour, so he's just been special to watch. It's one thing to have stuff, but when you have stuff and you can place pitches exactly where you want just about every time with pinpoint control, that's what makes you a special pitcher, and that's what Jacob DeGrom is. So, you know, when he's on the mound, the Mets always have a good chance. The problem is they never score any runs for him, so we'll see if they're able to this evening. The Yankees' first game of the doubleheader this afternoon with Garrett Cole on the mound against Alex Cobb. Phillies and the Marlins, it'll be Aaron Nola against Trevor Rogers. Phillies had another one of their classic bullpen meltdowns in the game last night as Miami rallied to win. Braves and the Nationals, another NL East matchup there. Josh Tomlin and Eric Fetty. Braves are scoring a ton of runs, and I'm sure you noticed the other day their 29th spot in a win over the Marlins, which broke a National League record. That lineup is humming right now. The top three in that lineup of Acuna, Freeman, and Ozuna all have OPSs north of 1,000. So they are hitting at a great clip. The problem is they're short on starting pitching. Red Sox and the Rays in an American League East matchup with Andrew Triggs matching up with the lefty Blake Snell. Second game of the Yankee doubleheader this evening will be Keegan Aiken against Masahiro Tanaka. And the Yankees, they have their two big guns on the mound for this doubleheader. No excuses. They got to sweep this this afternoon. Pirates and the Royals, a matchup of two teams that are at the bottom of the standings. Steven Brault against the rookie Chris Bubich. The A's are in Texas this evening. It's Mike Fiers against Luis Garcia. Tigers and the White Sox from Chicago. The former number 1 overall pick takes the ball. That's Casey Mize. Lucas Giolito has been a very good pitcher this year and has thrown the season's only no-hitter, although we'll have a note on that a little bit later on. He'll go for the White Sox. Cubs and the Brewers from Milwaukee. It's John Lester against Brandon Woodruff. The Cubs have been interesting because their big guys have not produced. If you look, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, well below what they typically do. Guys that have saved that team, Ian Happ, I've talked about. The other, and a surprising twist, is Jason Hayward, who I don't think he's ever going to live up to that contract. Probably impossible to do so with the amount of money that's on that. But he's having a nice year, and not too many people are taking notice. Indians and the Twins, as I mentioned, with Shane Bieber against Kenta Maeda. Phillies and the Marlins play a second game of a doubleheader. Reds and the Cardinals, it's Luis Castillo against Adam Wainwright. Wainwright is still getting it done after all these years. He's 4-0 with a 2.68 ERA. Angels and the Rockies, I think you can expect a lot of runs to be scored at Coors Field. Griffin Canning and German Marquez is the matchup there. We go down to San Diego with the red-hot Padres. They won yesterday over the Giants. They play them for 4 games this weekend. And tonight's matchup features Johnny Cueto against Garrett Richards. And finally, the Mariners and the Diamondbacks from the desert. Yusei Kikuchi against Caleb Smith, the lefty that they just acquired from the Marlins when they traded Starling Marte. And now we move into this day in baseball history, and it was on this day, September 11th, 1985, when Cincinnati's Pete Rose singled off Eric Show to become Major League Baseball's all-time hits leader. Rose passed Ty Cobb to top the list with 4,192. When Rose retired, he left a new mark of 4,256 hits, the all-time hit king, if only he could be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And now one more note before we go here for the 9th inning, and if you took a look at the box scores or were paying attention to baseball yesterday in the midst of everything else going on in the sports world with the NFL opening up, Chiefs and Texans, and playoff action in hockey and in basketball, you may have missed that there was a near no-hitter, and that came courtesy of the young right-hander for the Kansas City Royals, Brady Singer. Great outing against the Cleveland Indians. He lost the no-hitter with 2 outs in the 8th inning on an Austin Hedges single, but he still finished with a sparkling line of 8 innings, just the 1 hit allowed, 2 walks, and 8 strikeouts, and the Royals went on to an 11-1 victory and actually took the back 3 of that series to win 3 of 4, so it's been a difficult season, but a bright spot for Kansas City with one of their rookie starters on the mound. And that will close this edition of the Brian on Baseball podcast. Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with another show next week. Enjoy the weekend of baseball. You also have football starting up with Jets and Giants this Sunday as well, so look forward to that. And our thanks, as always, go to Dylan DePrato, and a happy birthday to Dylan, who celebrated a birthday earlier this week. So thanks again for listening, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at Brian Goudsward. Have a good weekend. So long.